Before the story starts, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
HOAKaren crossed the line with my disabled daughter. Justice was immediate. The neighborhood looked perfect. From afar, it seemed like a postcard come to life. Rows of identical houses, freshly mown lawns, white fences, and streets so clean you could almost see a reflection in them. Every house had its own carefully curated garden. Every mailbox was in line, neat and symmetrical. But appearances are often deceiving. At the end of one quiet street lived a father and his daughter. They were an ordinary pair, unnoticed by most, quietly living their lives. The father worked long hours and spent evenings with his daughter, who moved through the world in a wheelchair. She could not run or play like other children, but her smile was radiant, almost as if it could light up the entire street. Evenings were their sacred time. Each day, as the sun dipped low, he would wheel her outside, placing her under the small tree in front of their home. She loved to watch birds, trace the clouds, and feel the warm wind on her face. It was her moment of freedom, a simple joy she looked forward to each day. No one in the neighborhood paid much attention until someone started watching. Karen lived across the street. Everyone knew her, though few spoke about her directly. She was the HOA president, the self-appointed guardian of rules, a woman who believed her authority extended far beyond what it should. People whispered her name like a warning, "Don't cross Karen." Her house, like the others, was immaculate. But it wasn't just the cleanliness that set her apart, it was her obsession with control. She monitored every detail, every lawn, every car, every minor deviation from the HOA handbook. And when she saw something she didn't like, she acted without hesitation. That afternoon, Karen's gaze fell upon the little girl. The wheelchair under the tree. The soft sunlight on her face. The gentle breeze ruffling her hair. And something inside Karen stirred, not admiration, not compassion, but irritation. Rules were rules. That wheelchair, in her eyes, violated them. Karen opened her HOA rulebook as if it were a sacred text. Her eyes scanned each line with meticulous precision. When she looked up, her expression was calm, but there was a sharpness in her eyes, a hint of a storm brewing. The next day, a letter arrived. The father opened the mailbox after a long day at work. Inside, an official HOA notice lay folded neatly. The paper was thick, the words crisp, "No personal items may be placed on the front lawn." He exhaled slowly. He looked at his daughter, who was busy spinning a small toy bird between her fingers, blissfully unaware of the danger creeping toward her simple happiness. "I'll handle this," he whispered to himself. The following evening, Karen crossed the street. Her heels clicked sharply on the pavement, echoing like a warning. She approached calmly, her smile polite but rigid, like a mask carefully placed to hide the true coldness beneath. "I'm just doing my job," she said. The father nodded and explained about his daughter. He spoke calmly, kindly, as though she could understand the importance of small joys and human decency. "She needs fresh air," he said softly. "She can't move around like other children." Karen nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. Rules mattered more than a child's happiness. A smile meant nothing. Empathy was irrelevant. She turned and left, her steps precise and deliberate. But this was only the beginning. Days passed. Letters multiplied. Warnings escalated. Fines were threatened. Every notice felt colder, harsher, more determined than the last. The father felt the weight of these attacks pressing down on him, yet he remained patient. He refused to argue, refused to show anger. He simply watched, quietly resisting in his own way. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. The sun was high and unforgiving. The daughter sat under the tree, gently rocking in her wheelchair. Her eyes were bright, her smile faint but present, enjoying the simple pleasure of the breeze and warmth on her skin. The father stepped inside for just a moment to grab some water. That was all it took. Karen approached. Slowly. Deliberately. Every movement was calculated, precise, as though she were about to deliver a punishment she had imagined in her mind over the past weeks. A neighbor from across the street noticed her. They froze, unsure whether to intervene or just watch. Karen placed her hands on the wheelchair handles. She gave a small, cold smirk. "This is not allowed," she said loudly, almost theatrically. The little girl looked up in confusion, her smile fading. Then, realization hit. Fear filled her eyes. She began to cry softly, the sound fragile but piercing through the quiet street. The father rushed out. His heart raced. "What are you doing?" he shouted, his voice breaking with shock and anger. Karen stepped back, feigning calm. "I warned you," she said sharply, as if rules mattered more than humanity. The crying grew louder, catching the attention of more neighbors. Phones came out. Eyes widened. Murmurs began to ripple across the street. Karen finally let go of the wheelchair and stepped back, believing she had one. But she did not notice the phone recording her every move, the neighbors silently capturing every detail. For the father, this was a turning point. This was no longer about letters or fines or petty rules. This was about cruelty. About someone who thought power was more important than decency. He knelt beside his daughter, holding her gently, whispering that everything was okay. He felt something shift inside him, something that had been building with each warning letter, each cold stare, each moment Karen tried to assert control. The quiet, ordinary life they had lived for so long was gone. And as Karen walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, she had no idea that her actions were about to set in motion a chain of events she could never control. Because the street had witnessed. The camera had recorded. The truth was now a force beyond her grasp. And the father knew one thing with certainty: Karen had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The next chapter of their lives was about to begin. Before Karen's shadow loomed over their lives, the father and his daughter lived quietly. Not rich, not famous, not flashy. Just ordinary, peaceful people. And that was exactly how they liked it. Mornings were calm in their small home. Sunlight spilled gently through the curtains, touching the furniture in soft golden patches. The daughter, still half asleep, would wake slowly, her tiny hands clutching her favorite stuffed bird. She never rushed, the world around her moved too fast anyway. The father moved quietly around her. His steps were careful, gentle, as if he were navigating a fragile world. He brushed her hair, adjusted her clothes, and spoke softly. Every word mattered. "Good morning, sunshine," he would say. And she would smile back, her small face lighting up the room like a lamp that refused to dim. Life had not been easy for either of them. Doctors had explained her condition in detail, outlining limits and challenges. But the father never saw her weakness. To him, she was strong. She was resilient. Every small victory, raising her hand, spinning her toy, rolling under the sunlight, was a triumph. Evenings were sacred. Every day, just as the sun began to dip low, he would wheel her outside to their little patch of freedom under the tree in the front yard. She loved the sky. The wind. The soft rustle of leaves. Every bird that perched nearby became a friend. Every passing car, a story she imagined in her mind. Neighbors noticed, sometimes. A smile here, a wave there. But most people never paid attention. They kept to themselves. That was fine with him. He didn't want recognition. He only wanted these moments of quiet happiness for his daughter. But someone always watches. Karen. Across the street, the HOA president watched them like a hawk. From her front window, she observed the routines of her neighbors. She noted the arrival of the newspaper, the pattern of the cars, the children playing, or in this case, the child in the wheelchair. Every detail mattered to her. In her mind, life was a system. Rules were sacred. Deviation was a threat. And that wheelchair, resting under the tree every evening, was a violation she could not ignore. She didn't see a child enjoying a fleeting moment of freedom. She didn't see a father cherishing the smile of his daughter. All she saw was disorder. And disorder, to Karen, was intolerable. One evening, she crossed the street. Her heels clicked on the pavement like a ticking clock. The father noticed her coming but stayed calm, rolling his daughter a little closer to the shade. She looked up and waved, innocent and trusting. Karen's eyes narrowed. She didn't smile back. Instead, she nodded curtly. "You know this is against HOA rules," she said. The father spoke slowly, politely. "She needs this," he said. "She can't move like other children. This is important for her." Karen listened but did not hear. Rules, she reminded herself, mattered above all else. Compassion was irrelevant. Obedience was everything. The little girl, unaware of the tension, reached out for a passing butterfly. Karen's gaze followed her hand, her expression unreadable. But the father could feel it. That quiet intensity, that obsession with control, it was a storm waiting to break. The next morning brought letters. Warnings. Notices. Subtle threats. Each one carefully worded, colder than the last. The father read them in silence, then tucked them neatly away in a drawer. He didn't want his daughter to see his worry. But she noticed anyway. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked softly one afternoon, her eyes wide and questioning. "No, never," he said quickly, forcing a smile. But inside, his heart felt heavy. Every letter, every warning, felt like a stone on his chest. Every passing glance from Karen made the air thicker, more tense. He knew something had changed. The quiet life they had built, the small routines, the moments of joy, was under threat. The peace of their little world was being tested. Karen's obsession grew with every passing day. She would watch from her window, making notes, writing reminders, checking her rulebook repeatedly. Every evening, she would imagine a confrontation. Every morning, she would think of a way to assert her authority. The father, however, did not react in anger. He remained calm. He observed. He prepared. He watched his daughter play, roll, laugh, and imagine. And he knew he had to protect this, the freedom, the joy, the innocence that Karen's rules threatened to destroy. He began documenting everything. Not yet for confrontation, not yet for revenge, but for protection. Every warning, every letter, every moment of intimidation was recorded mentally, stored carefully. One day, this would matter. And he sensed it was coming. Because Karen's attention was no longer casual. It was focused. Sharp. Determined. One evening, the father noticed her pause across the street, standing by her window and watching them both. Her eyes lingered a second too long, a notebook clutched tightly in her hand. The daughter waved again, her smile pure and trusting. Karen looked away quickly, as if caught in a moment she could not understand. The father rolled his daughter a little closer under the tree. He held her hand. And as the sun set, he felt the quiet shift. The air felt heavier. Something was coming. He did not know when. He did not know how. But he knew it would arrive. And when it did, he would be ready. Because life had taught him patience. And patience, combined with love, could face even the most relentless storm. The street may have seemed peaceful. The houses may have been perfect. But quiet moments, he knew, often hide the most fragile victories. And someone, somewhere, was about to test them all. Karen believed in order. She believed rules were sacred, untouchable, and absolute. And in her mind, anyone who broke them deserved correction. Across the street, the father and his daughter lived quietly, unaware that every routine, every small moment of joy, had become a threat to her. Every day, Karen watched. She did not simply glance, she observed like a hawk, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She noted the exact position of the wheelchair under the tree. She noted the way the father pushed it, the way the little girl's hands moved, the way the sun caught the strands of her hair. In Karen's mind, disorder could never be allowed to exist, especially not in her neighborhood. She began making notes. Little observations in a small notebook, scribbled carefully in her precise handwriting. Child sitting in lawn. Possible violation. Parent refuses to remove personal items. Enforcement needed. Every line reinforced the growing obsession, a mental checklist she repeated over and over. For her, this was more than rules. This was about control. One afternoon, she approached the father's house again. Her heels clicked against the pavement like a metronome, each step deliberate, echoing down the street. She stopped at the edge of the lawn and crossed her arms. Her gaze landed on the wheelchair. On the little girl. On the father. "You've been warned," she said, her voice low but sharp. The father did not flinch. Calmly, he said, "She needs this. She can't move like other children. This is important for her." Karen's lips tightened. She nodded, but there was no understanding in her eyes. Compassion was irrelevant. The rules were everything. The little girl looked up, sensing tension but not fully understanding. She smiled faintly at Karen, a pure, innocent gesture. Karen did not return it. Her gaze drifted away, but the sharp edge of anger lingered beneath her calm exterior. That evening, Karen sent an email to the HOA board. Each word was chosen carefully, each phrase designed to make the father appear difficult, uncooperative, disobedient. She painted the picture of a man breaking rules, disregarding authority, setting a dangerous example. The father received it quietly. He read it slowly, folded it neatly, and placed it in his folder with the others. This had become a collection of warnings, notices, and now accusations, evidence of her obsession. Karen's obsession did not fade. It grew. She no longer watched from afar, she lingered. She walked slowly past the father's house. She stopped to observe when the daughter was outside. She even timed the father's visits, noting how long the wheelchair stayed under the tree. In her mind, she was preparing for confrontation. She imagined it repeatedly, how she would assert power, enforce compliance, and demonstrate that no one could defy her. But the father remained patient. Quiet. Observant. He refused to escalate, refusing to give her the reaction she craved. And that calm unnerved Karen. One afternoon, she stood across the street, watching the girl roll under the tree. The sunlight caught the child's hair, and her laughter, soft and unassuming, floated in the air. Something inside Karen shifted. Not kindness. Not concern. But irritation. Why did this simple moment, this innocent joy, exist outside her control? She clenched her notebook tighter. The rules had to matter more than anything. She told herself she was correct. She was protecting order. And yet, she could not stop thinking about them. About the little girl. About the father. About the wheelchair, so out of place in her perfect street. That evening, she approached again. A neighbor watched from across the road. Karen's hands reached for the wheelchair. Her voice, when she spoke, was sharp. "This is not allowed." The little girl looked up, confused. Fear touched her face. She began to cry softly, a sound that carried more weight than Karen could ever anticipate. The father rushed out. His heart raced, a mix of anger and protectiveness. "What are you doing?" he shouted. Karen stepped back, pretending composure. "I warned you," she said. But that moment, brief as it was, changed everything. Karen's obsession had finally turned into action. She had crossed the invisible boundary that separated enforcement from cruelty. And someone had captured it all. A neighbor had taken out a phone, recording the encounter. Every movement. Every word. Every tear. Karen left, satisfied she had done her duty. But the father's quiet patience had turned into resolve. He knelt beside his daughter, whispering that it was okay, that she was safe, that he would always protect her. Her cry had pierced more than just the afternoon air. It had pierced the quiet street, the innocence of their home, and the fragile trust that Karen thought she could control. For Karen, this was just another moment in her obsession. But for the father, it was a turning point. He began documenting everything, carefully collecting evidence, saving every email, every letter, every video. He knew this would matter, because Karen's obsession was relentless and truth would need to meet it. That night, he did not sleep. He watched his daughter breathe. He listened to the quiet. He reviewed every moment in his mind. Across the street, Karen sat at her desk, looking at her rules, her notes, her checklist of violations. She felt a strange unease. For the first time, she was not in complete control. The calm, quiet family she had been so obsessed with had begun to resist, not with confrontation, but with patience, with dignity, with love. She did not see it yet, but the tide was turning. The father and daughter had survived the first storm, but he knew the next encounter would define everything. Because Karen's obsession had escalated into a threat, and patience, as quiet as it was, would soon face her obsession head-on. And when it did, the neighborhood would witness a reckoning unlike any they had imagined. The afternoon sun was harsh, unforgiving. Its golden light spilled across the quiet street, illuminating every detail. Birds chirped faintly, cars passed occasionally, but for one small family, the world felt like it had stopped. The little girl sat under the tree in her wheelchair, her small hands clutching the toy she loved. Her father had wheeled her into the shade, trying to keep her safe from the sun's intensity. She smiled softly, completely unaware that danger had already crossed the street. Karen appeared again. Her footsteps were deliberate, clicking against the pavement like a warning bell. Her eyes locked on the girl, on the wheelchair, on the father. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind. In her world, she was enforcing the rules. In reality, she was about to shatter a small world built on love and patience. The father sensed it immediately. Something in the air had shifted. A tension so sharp it could almost be touched. He watched as Karen's shadow fell across the grass, and his heart skipped. Without warning, she stepped closer. Her hands gripped the wheelchair's handles. The little girl's eyes widened in confusion. "This is not allowed," Karen said, her voice calm but chilling. The girl's hands trembled. A cry escaped her lips. It was soft, almost broken, yet it carried through the quiet street like a knife through fabric. The father lunged forward, panic surging. "What are you doing?" he shouted, his voice raw with anger and fear. Karen stepped back, her composure unshaken, or at least, that's what she wanted everyone to believe. "I warned you," she said coldly. But the street reacted differently this time. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Some stepped outside, unsure whether to intervene. Phones were raised to record, subtle but inevitable. Murmurs ran down the rows of houses, the quiet tension building like a storm ready to break. The father knelt beside his daughter, wrapping his arms around her. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm here. Nothing will hurt you." His voice trembled, but his resolve was unbroken. The little girl clutched him tightly, her tears soaking his shirt. Her small body shook, but she knew she was safe, even if fear had entered her world for the first time. Karen's gaze swept across the gathering neighbors. She wanted them to see obedience, to witness the power of her authority. She wanted fear. But what she got was attention, scrutiny, and, unknowingly, documentation. Every move she made, every word she spoke, was recorded. Her obsession had become her downfall. The father slowly pushed the wheelchair back into the shade, shielding his daughter from both the sun and the escalating tension. He spoke softly to her, soothing her, letting her know the world was still safe. Karen, sensing that the moment was slipping away, tried one last assertion of power. "Rules are rules," she shouted. But the words fell flat. The witnesses were present. The cries had been heard. The injustice had been documented. The balance of power was beginning to tilt. The father's calm presence, his patient endurance, was a counterweight to her aggression. He did not raise his voice. He did not retaliate. But every neighbor who watched understood, something had gone too far. Karen, feeling her control slipping, turned and walked away. She believed she had delivered her warning, asserted her authority. She did not realize that the seeds of her undoing had already been sown. Across the street, the father sat beside his daughter, brushing tears from her cheeks. He whispered words of comfort, of safety, of reassurance. "Nothing will hurt you again," he promised. The neighbor who had recorded the incident stepped back inside quietly, their phones still holding evidence that could not be ignored. A silent revolution had begun, sparked by patience and courage rather than anger or confrontation. That evening, the father did not sleep. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind. The little girl's soft cries, the sun on her face, Karen's cold expression. Each replay strengthened his resolve. He began organizing evidence, letters, emails, videos, medical documents. Every detail mattered. Every piece would count. Meanwhile, Karen sat alone in her house, reviewing her own notes, her rulebook, her checklist of violations. She felt unease for the first time. She could no longer be sure she was in control. The calm, quiet family she had been obsessed with resisting her had survived, intact. And that realization gnawed at her. The father understood one thing clearly. This was no longer about letters, fines, or HOA rules. It was about justice, about protecting the vulnerable, about standing firm when confronted with cruelty disguised as authority. He knew the storm had only just begun. The next confrontation would not be one of chance. It would be deliberate. It would be prepared. And this time, he would not simply endure, it would be his turn to define the outcome. The neighborhood had watched. The camera had captured the truth. And once the truth was revealed, Karen would find that her obsession could no longer shield her. The father held his daughter close. She lay her head on his shoulder, still trembling, still scared. But slowly, the fear began to fade. His arms, steady and warm, reminded her that she was safe. That love could protect where rules failed. The street, once silent and passive, now felt charged with anticipation. Something had changed. Something was coming. And in the quiet aftermath of Karen's overreach, a single truth became clear: patience, courage, and love could withstand even the most relentless obsession. The little girl closed her eyes, breathing slowly under the tree, unaware that the moment she had cried would soon spark a reckoning. The father whispered one final promise to her: no one will ever hurt you like that again. And for the first time, the quiet street seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the justice that was about to arrive. The night after Karen's overreach, the father did not speak. He did not shout. He did not post angry messages or call for confrontation. Instead, he embraced silence. Silence had power. While Karen obsessed over control, over rules, over appearances, the father carefully observed, waited, and prepared. He had realized that reacting in anger would only give her what she wanted: fear, chaos, a demonstration of authority. He would not give her that satisfaction. Instead, he became methodical. Every letter from the HOA, every email, every subtle threat was carefully collected. He organized them in a folder, each one a piece of a story she was unknowingly writing herself. Every warning, every accusation, every attempt to intimidate him became evidence, proof of her obsession and cruelty. The little girl, unaware of the tension surrounding her, continued her routines. She rolled under the tree, waved at passing neighbors, and smiled. Her innocence remained untouched, even as the world around her grew tense. Karen noticed this. She began walking past their house more often, lingering near the sidewalk, watching. She checked the yard, timed the father's movements, made notes in her notebook. Her obsession had become relentless. To her, the rule-breaking family had to yield. To her, obedience was non-negotiable. Yet the father remained calm. He never reacted with anger. He simply observed, waited, and documented. He watched as Karen's focus grew sharper, her movements more deliberate. Every approach, every comment, every glimmer of authority she tried to assert was quietly recorded in his mind and on camera. The neighborhood, too, began to notice the tension. Subtle whispers, brief glances out of windows, neighbors stopping to check on one another. The once quiet street now held a latent energy, an invisible current of anticipation. Something was shifting. One evening, Karen approached again. Her steps were confident, her heels clicking with authority. She stopped at the edge of the yard, eyeing the wheelchair. The little girl smiled at her instinctively, but Karen's gaze hardened. This was not a friendly visit. This was an inspection. A test. You know this is against HOA rules, Karen said sharply. The father remained calm. She needs this. She cannot move like other children. This is her safe moment. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She nodded, but her eyes betrayed frustration. Rules were paramount, yet her power seemed to slip with every day that the girl continued to sit, to play, to breathe freely in her little patch of shade. Days passed. Karen escalated her tactics. Another letter. Another subtle warning. Another implied threat. Each one became another brick in the wall of obsession she was building around them. The father did not respond immediately. Instead, he worked quietly, building his own arsenal. He documented everything meticulously. Each letter, every email, every interaction became part of a collection. Photographs of the wheelchair in the yard. Videos of Karen approaching. Notes on every word she spoke. Witness statements from neighbors. He was preparing for the moment when the truth would have to be revealed. And it would be revealed not through anger or confrontation, but through calm, collected evidence. Karen, unaware of this preparation, began to feel an unfamiliar unease. The family she had tried to intimidate remained calm, unshaken, and patient. Their silence was louder than any argument she could have initiated. The neighborhood, too, was noticing. Whispers traveled faster now. Observers were quietly gathering. For Karen, control was slipping. She tried harder. She walked past more often, lingered longer, and sent more communications to the HOA board, insisting that the father was defiant, that rules were being broken, that authority was being ignored. The father remained quiet. He did not respond. This silence became a weapon. It was sharper than any letter. More precise than any argument. Louder than any threat. By refusing to engage, he allowed truth to accumulate. Evidence to mount. Justice to take form. One evening, as the father sat with his daughter under the familiar tree, he looked around the quiet street. Neighbors peered from windows, whispering, observing. Some had cameras of their own. Some were simply present, silently witnessing the tension, the power struggle. The father did not need to speak. His presence alone, calm and resolute, was a statement. He would not be intimidated. He would not be bullied. He would wait. Karen, across the street, sat at her desk. Her notes sprawled before her. Her rulebook lay open. She reviewed the day's events, trying to analyze the father's silence, trying to understand why her power no longer commanded fear. She felt the subtle shift, but she could not stop it. The momentum had passed into his hands, unseen but undeniable. The father spent that evening carefully arranging everything he had gathered. Emails, letters, photographs, videos, and witness accounts were all organized and ready. He was building a case, not out of anger, but out of necessity. Protecting his daughter, securing her safety, and ensuring that truth would stand unshaken. In his quiet way, he had taken control of the narrative. Karen had obsessed over rules, but he had mastered reality. He had used patience, calm, and careful observation as weapons far sharper than any threat she could impose. By the end of the week, Karen's obsession had begun to crumble. The neighborhood's whispers grew louder. People were noticing her repeated actions, her intimidation tactics. But no one spoke directly to her. They waited. They observed. And the father waited too, for the right moment to act. Because silence, he had learned, was more powerful than confrontation. Patience was more effective than rage. And truth, carefully documented, was more powerful than authority. He held his daughter close as the sun began to set. She rolled her wheelchair slowly, unaware of the quiet battle unfolding around her. She laughed softly at a bird perched nearby, her innocence shining brightly. The father smiled faintly. He knew the storm was coming. Not a storm of shouting or fury, but a storm of truth. A reckoning that Karen, with all her obsession and rules, could not escape. And when that moment arrived, the neighborhood would witness something powerful, that calm, measured patience, combined with courage and love, could overcome even the most relentless obsession. For now, silence had become the weapon. And it was more deadly than any words. The air in the HOA meeting room was thick with tension. No one spoke at first. Chairs creaked as board members shifted, eyes darting to the screens at the front. Phones rested silently on the table, recording evidence that would decide the outcome. The father sat calmly beside his daughter, his hands folded, his posture steady. He said nothing, but every fiber of his being radiated resolve. Across the room, Karen's expression was carefully composed, but her confidence wavered under the weight of expectation. This was supposed to be her domain, a stage where authority, rules, and fear were hers to wield. But something felt different. Something unshakable. The video began to play. No music. No edits. Just truth. The little girl in her wheelchair under the tree, her smile innocent, her laughter soft. Then, Karen approaching, hands gripping the wheelchair, her cold voice slicing through the quiet afternoon. The girl's small cry, trembling yet piercing, echoed across the silent street. The father rushing to her side. His hand steady, protective, calming. The room held its breath. Karen's lips parted, but no words came out. The board watched, transfixed. Every action, every detail recorded, left no room for doubt. This was not about rules anymore. This was about behavior. About judgment. About cruelty disguised as authority. The father did not speak immediately. He did not need to. The truth was louder than any argument he could make. His patience, his calm endurance, spoke volumes. One board member leaned forward. "Did you touch the child's wheelchair?" she asked Karen. Karen's hands clenched, then loosened. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Silence hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to break. No one defended her. No one could. The evidence was undeniable. Another board member spoke, her voice steady and unwavering. "We have medical proof. We have witnesses. We have video evidence. Your actions have gone far beyond enforcing rules." Karen's face turned pale. Her carefully constructed authority was crumbling before her eyes. She tried to speak again, but the room had already decided. Her words fell flat, empty against the weight of truth. The chairperson cleared his throat, his gaze sharp. "Effective immediately," he said, his voice echoing in the room, "you are removed from your HOA position. All fines against the family are cancelled. Your authority in this neighborhood has ended." Karen froze. "What?" she whispered, disbelief shaking her voice. The father finally spoke. His voice was calm but firm, each word carrying the weight of righteousness. "I only wanted my daughter to feel safe," he said. "Nothing else?" A board member nodded. "And you protected her," she replied. Karen's face was a mask of panic now. She tried to regain composure. "This is unfair," she snapped, her voice cracking. "I was only enforcing policy." No one answered. The room had shifted. The power she had wielded so effortlessly was gone. She was no longer the figure of fear she had imagined herself to be. The chairperson raised his hand. "This meeting is over." Karen gathered her things, moving quickly toward the door. Her steps were rushed, her head bowed. Outside, the evening air felt colder than usual. The streets she had once ruled now held nothing for her. No fear. No respect. Only the quiet judgment of truth. Meanwhile, the father held his daughter close. She rested her head on his shoulder, safe and calm. Her small hands squeezed his shirt, a silent thank you he could feel in his chest. Outside the room, neighbors had gathered. Some smiled. Some nodded quietly. Some whispered relief and admiration in their voices. Justice had spoken, and it had not hesitated. The father looked around. He saw faces he had known for years, some distant, some close. All were witnesses to the power of calm, patience, and truth. The little girl's laughter, soft and bright, reminded everyone that courage and love often triumph over cruelty and obsession. Karen, walking down the steps of the HOA building, could feel the eyes on her. But it was no longer respect or fear. It was observation, judgment. Her influence was gone. And for the first time, she understood what it felt like to be powerless. The father wheeled his daughter outside into the evening sunlight. The street, once tense and uncertain, now felt alive. Neighbors waved, children played, and the small world of love and patience the father had protected began to breathe again. He held his daughter's hand tightly. "It's over," he whispered. "No one can hurt you again." She looked up at him, her eyes bright. She did not fully understand the complexity of the battle that had been fought, but she understood safety, love, and the return of peace. And that was enough. Inside her house, Karen closed the curtains, sitting alone. She could no longer control the narrative. No one would follow her commands. No one would fear her rules. The power she had wielded so proudly was gone, and the realization sank in deeper than any defeat she had ever known. Outside, the street returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after witnessing something extraordinary. Life continued. Children laughed. Neighbors chatted. The little girl rolled under the tree, enjoying the simple joy of sunlight on her face. The father watched her, proud, exhausted, and relieved. He had endured, he had protected, and now the world, his world, was safe once more. Justice had not waited. It had arrived swiftly, calmly, and without compromise. And for the first time in a long time, the quiet street felt truly peaceful again. The street had changed. Not in appearance, rows of houses still gleamed in the sunlight, lawns were still manicured, and fences still lined up perfectly. But the air was different. There was a sense of calm, a sense of safety that had been absent for far too long. The tension that once hung like a cloud had lifted. The little girl rolled slowly under the tree, her small hands clutching the toy she loved. She laughed softly as the sunlight kissed her face. Her wheelchair traced gentle circles on the grass, leaving marks that would fade, but the memory of her joy remained vivid. Her father followed, walking beside her with steady steps. Every once in a while, he glanced at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride, relief, and quiet triumph. Life, he realized, could return to ordinary moments. But ordinary was now extraordinary. The HOA storm that had dominated their lives for weeks, Karen's obsession with control, the endless warnings and threats, it all seemed like a distant nightmare. And yet, the father knew the lessons it had left behind were permanent. Karen had been removed from her position. The fines and threats were gone. Her authority, once wielded like a weapon, had crumbled under the weight of truth. She remained across the street, sitting behind her closed curtains, unable to touch the family's lives again. Her obsession, unchecked and uncontrolled, had been defeated not by anger or confrontation, but by patience, evidence, and courage. The father glanced at his daughter. She looked up at him, smiling, unaware of the battles fought to protect her simple happiness. Her laughter was soft, musical, and pure. It was the sound of life untouched by cruelty, the sound of innocence preserved. Neighbors, too, had noticed the shift. They no longer whispered about Karen's rules or feared her authority. Children play freely, doors open easily, and a sense of community, previously fragile and tentative, began to flourish once more. One neighbor, who had observed the earlier confrontation, stepped into the yard. "It's good to see her smiling again," they said softly. The father nodded. "She's safe now," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "That's all that matters." Across the street, Karen sat alone. The curtains closed, the house immaculate as ever, but the energy had shifted. Her power was gone. Her influence nullified. And she felt the quiet sting of defeat, a lesson that authority without compassion is fragile. The father guided his daughter closer to the shade, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "We'll always protect this," he whispered. "No one will ever take it from us again." The little girl's eyes sparkled. She didn't fully understand the complexity of what had happened, but she understood safety. She understood love. And she understood that her small world, though ordinary, was secure. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the quiet street, the father took a deep breath. Life would go on. Challenges would appear. Rules would exist. But the lesson was clear: kindness and protection outweigh fear and control. Children's laughter rang in the distance. A neighbor waved from across the street. The little girl waved back, her smile radiant. The father's heart swelled. The street, once a battleground of authority and obsession, now hummed with life, joy, and simple peace. He reflected on the ordeal. Karen's obsession had escalated because she mistook rules for power. She had failed to see that true authority comes not from enforcing rules blindly, but from empathy, respect, and understanding. And in trying to dominate, she had exposed herself to judgment and defeat. The father watched his daughter play, her hands spinning her toy bird, her laughter pure. He knew that patience, courage, and calm had been stronger than fear and intimidation. He had protected her not with anger, but with evidence, preparation, and unwavering love. The little girl rolled closer to him, resting her head against his chest. "I'm happy," she said softly. "You should be," he replied, stroking her hair gently. "You're safe. And we'll keep it that way." Across the neighborhood, doors opened, and neighbors stepped outside to enjoy the evening. Conversations resumed. Smiles were exchanged. The once tense street felt alive again, not with fear, but with connection, trust, and security. The father knew that the lesson extended beyond their home. The street had witnessed a small but powerful truth: courage, patience, and the protection of the vulnerable could overcome obsession, cruelty, and misplaced authority. And it was permanent. The little girl looked up at the sky. The clouds moved lazily, drifting across the fading sunlight. Birds chirped, flying from tree to tree. The wind rustled the leaves gently. Her father held her hand tightly, guiding her, protecting her, and watching her take in the beauty of the world. Life had returned to its quiet rhythm. But it carried a new weight, a weight of understanding, of security, and of hard-earned peace. Karen would remain across the street, a cautionary figure in the background, but the father and his daughter were no longer afraid. Their lives, though simple, were filled with safety, love, and freedom. The street would continue to move, to change, to evolve. But for this father and daughter, the lessons had been learned, the joy reclaimed, and the peace restored. And as the sun finally set, casting warm orange light across the little yard, the father whispered one last promise to his daughter: "No one will ever harm you like that again. Not here. Not ever." The little girl smiled, her eyes closing in contentment, the warmth of the evening wrapping around her like a protective blanket. And for the first time in a long while, the quiet street felt completely at peace. Because love, patience, and truth had won. And justice, when it finally arrived, had been absolute.
Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it.